Obviously, you are curious about when things started and what are the main things that were happening along the way. We keep saying from the beginning of the Industrial Revolution, fossil fuel emissions have increased and warming has happened, and we said maybe the acceleration of warming is happening now, and so on and so forth. But Grandpa, can you tell me about some important dates? Well, we can, and this will not be comprehensive because we are just picking some subjective choice. The author decides these are the things, and another person will have another date, and you can add more things or less things, and so on. So let's start anyway, just sticking to the book of Gail Herman. 1790 first factory built in Rhode Island, which is a northeastern state, a tiny state in the US on the East Coast, starting the American Industrial Revolution. The American Industrial Revolution, because Gale is from the US, but you know that before that the UK had the steam engine already and things were beginning to grow. 1880 global temperature first measured for historical record, and soon in 1896 Svante Arrhenius, a scientist, published his first model linking human CO2 emissions to climate. He didn't even know what the amount of CO2 concentration was. He just said, we are burning all this coal and producing CO2, and this is going to cause problems. And he even said how much warming will happen and so on, without having a climate model or measurements or aircrafts or satellites and so on. In 1957, Roger Revelle finds oceans have limited ability to absorb CO2. CO2 can dissolve into the water easily, ocean can take it up, but it's not an infinite sink of CO2. But between 1896 and 1957, in 1912, there was a newspaper article talking about global warming and CO2 increase and so on. In 1937, Guy Callender put out another nice paper using observations of CO2 from different places to say warming is happening and it's going to get really bad, and we kept ignoring it and ignoring it and ignoring it. 1970 came along, and Earth Day and the Environmental Protection Agency were established in the US under Nixon, but this is a very US centric view, so many dates have been skipped along the way. There were few other steps by the Europeans and so on. In 1978, aerosol spray cans with chlorofluorocarbons were banned around the world because it was discovered that the chlorine part of this molecule was escaping into the upper atmosphere and reacting with ozone and creating an ozone hole, which was bad because that would allow the energetic UV, ultraviolet radiation, to come to the surface and damage marine creatures and human beings and all life forms. Right? That was not good. So several people won the Nobel Prize for discovering this process. 1997, close to 200 countries signed the Kyoto Protocol to limit greenhouse gas emissions. Between 1978 and 1997, there were many conferences, international meetings where countries recognized that we were doing damage to the environment and we were emitting too many greenhouse gases and so on. Jumping to 2008, US lists the polar bear as a threatened species at risk of becoming endangered due to habitat loss. That sea ice cover in the Arctic was getting lost, and polar bears were not going to survive if we continue this way. 2010, record-breaking heat wave in Russia, during which temperatures reach over 100 degree Fahrenheit. So this was definitely a big flag. But in 2003, a massive European heat wave killed over 75,000 people, and that was not that didn't go unnoticed. But you always have to see, what do we learn? Do we really change our ways after such big events? It turns out that we think about it, we make little changes, after a few years we forget it again and we go back to our ways because we are so used to living a good life with so much energy. Okay, in 2011 and 2015, droughts in East African countries caused major famines, as we talked about, in Kenya, in Djibouti, Ethiopia, Somalia, and so on. In 2016, annual global temperatures break record for the third straight year. CO2 levels hit a milestone of 400 ppm. If you go back in time and look at the data we can get from ice cores and tree rings and corals and so on, this was the highest level in many million years. Remember, the ice age ended at 280 ppm, and before that it was at about 380 ppm if you go back 100,000 years ago, and so on, right? In 2017, President Trump of the United States rolled back the Clean Power Plan and pulled the US out of the 2015 Paris Agreement, which is a real dangerous and shameful thing, because the richest country, which has contributed so much to the accumulated CO2 since the Industrial Revolution, actually said, we are not going to participate in climate action that rest of the world wants to carry out, and this is not a good thing. And now in 2024, as I'm recording this, there is again an election coming up in 2024 November, and Mr. Trump is again trying to be the president, and he's already saying that he will not bother with climate change and climate action, and he will let oil companies do whatever they want. Watch out for that. 17.9. Oops, I went in the wrong direction, did I? Yeah, that's... what did I do here? Yeah, let's I took another one from somewhere else. This is timeline of the world as opposed to the US. This is timeline of climate change, mostly focused on the US and few other incidents. Going back here, 1790, President George Washington delivers first ever State of the Union address on January 19. US became a democracy. President George Washington was of course very famous guy in the US. 1896, Leo Hirschfeld invents the Tootsie Roll, named for his daughter. First modern Olympic Games were held in Athens, Greece. So human life was going on, and not just climate change. The first flight of the Wright brothers powered the airplane in 1903, and by now we are flying all over the universe or out of the solar system. You know, at least satellites are leaving the solar system, and we have sent people to the moon, and we have sent rovers and helicopters to Mars, and so on. 1964, President Lyndon Johnson, that we talked about in the beginning of this book, signed the Civil Rights Act into law, and if you are from outside US, it doesn't make sense, don't worry about it. Rock and roll band the Beatles officially break up in 1970, a big timeline for the world, just as a contrast to climate change, because what people pay attention to is not necessarily climate change, but they are worrying about the Beatles and Michael Jackson and whoever else. In 1972, first successful video game, Pong, debuted, and now video games are a multi-billion-dollar industry, as you know. 1978, Harriet Tubman becomes the first African-American woman honored on a US postage stamp. She was famous for fighting for the voting rights and so on, a black woman, African-American woman. 1997, J.K. Rowling's first Harry Potter book, Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone, is published in the UK. As you know, J.K. Rowling wrote many Harry Potter books, and they all became big movies, and maybe you have read some of them, right? In 2001, Al-Qaeda terrorists hijack 4 airplanes, 2 of which destroy the Twin Towers at the World Trade Center in New York City. One crashed into the Pentagon in Washington DC, one crashed into a field in Pennsylvania, and so on. And the question has been whether now climate impacts on food and water and energy and heat and so on are creating terrorists, climate refugees, and so on. 2009, Barack Obama was sworn in as the first African American president of the United States. Made a lot of noise about climate change, climate action, but it isn't clear if he really solved any problems, if he just exported more coal and didn't talk about it. 2010, Apple introduces the iPad tablet computer, which I use all the time. Very convenient to travel with, because I have 1,000 books and 3,000 papers, scientific papers I want to read on my iPad. 2016, Donald Trump wins the presidential election, and 2017 he had already cancelled or reneged on the clean power plan and pulled US out of the 2015 Paris Agreement. In other words, you have to keep your eyeballs on climate change, on greenhouse gases, on health impacts, impacts on food, water, energy, buildings, and so on, and find solutions, and not be bothered by changes in politics and changes in renewable energy versus fossil fuel. You should keep your eye on the ball and keep on going into the future with your mind strongly determined on what is best for you, what is best for your family, what is best for your community, your country, and the world, and all other species. As you grow older and you get married, you have children, what's best for your children, your grandchildren. That's going to take a lot of determination to stay focused, but the more you learn, the more likely you are to be well informed and make the right choices. You have to decide for yourself what kind of risk we are facing with climate change, what kind of risk will keep growing if we continue to burn fossil fuels. And what great future waits for us. Clean air, clean water, health, all the amenities, clean energy, and you can travel around without worrying about destroying the planet if you find alternate fuels and alternate energy. You don't want to keep worrying about the future. You want to be excited about the future. You want to think about building rockets to go to the moon, to Mars and beyond. Maybe you'll go to Mars and come back in your lifetime. Maybe we'll find life on another planet or on another moon of another planet, and so on, and we'll learn more and more about how we evolved and what we are doing, and whether we can change our ways and live happily ever after without having to destroy the planet that actually provides us a place to stay, right? This is like whether we will be the good bacteria that live in our stomach and help us digest, and microbiome that makes us healthy, and so on and so forth. We are living in the gut of this earth. Are we going to be the good bacteria, or are we going to be a virus that causes cancer to the host that puts us in its belly? You think about it. You do the right thing, okay? So I will see you in some other podcast, and for now we will close this book on What is Climate Change by Gail Herman, and see you elsewhere. Be good, do well, be good, okay? See you, do well, be good, whatever.